Welcome, Asaf Ezra from Granulate, the CEO and co-founder. It's really great to get a chance to talk to you in this way. I've worked closely with your company in the past, and now, as I'm getting familiar with your value prop, now I start to really get to know something about the people. So this is an even greater opportunity to get to know one of the co-founders and the guy at the top of the company. So welcome, and thanks for taking the time. I'm curious, just to start out, a little bit about you. Of all the different career paths that you had available to you, what made you take the path of entrepreneurship? What led you on that route?
I think that's a very hard question, right? I think at some point you decide for yourself, look, this is a huge problem. I have the right resources, I have the right knowledge, I have the right partner to go for it. And we can do something that actually changes the way companies work, changes the way a lot of people handle, well, in our case, the performance. And so for us, it's a huge opportunity, and it's very humbling to see people use your product, that it brings them benefit. And we've seen a lot of it in the IDF, and we knew that it's something that we really want to see if we can do out in the world,
Yeah. And I should mention that, and we'll come back to this a little bit, but the Granulate is addressing resource optimization. It's using machine learning AI techniques to do this. That's also a really interesting topic. So we'll come back to that a bit later in more detail. One thing I'm also curious about is I saw in the beginning of your career, you were in the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces. What's it like to work in the IT department of something like the Israeli Defense Forces?
Well, I don't think it's any different than any other IT department that you'll find. You don't have access to the cloud, if that's what you were thinking about. But other than that, I think it's pretty much the same. At the end of the day, we're software engineers, program managers, project managers. It's not that different. And I guess the purpose of the software that you're generating is a little different than what you see. But there are more and more companies who sort of provide you with cyber offensive services. So I think that's also very similar to what you might find in the IDF or similar places.
Yeah, I've heard Israeli colleagues of mine in the past use the phrase "security is utmost." And it seems that a lot of IT, well, in your case, it's optimization, but a lot of IT security and other related kind of things have come from Israeli companies, which is pretty interesting. Now, how did you get to know your co-founder, Tal Sayag? I've noticed you guys had quite a shared history. Is he somebody that you knew for a long time?
Yeah, so we've known each other for about 12 or so years. He joined the army in a cohort, the 30th cohort of a program called Talpiot. I joined that cohort about 2 to 3 weeks after it was enlisted. And we've been in close contact ever since. During the program, we were roommates. We were part of the same team that was working on the same project. During our service, we were in 8200, and again, pretty close together. And we were discharged about 2 months apart. We decided that we'll go for it once we do. And we joined YL Ventures as entrepreneurs in residence. I think basically for the past 12 years, we've been doing everything together.
What is an entrepreneur in residence? I've seen that before. What is a day-to-day like in that role?
It's not that different than doing the ideation at home, except you have someone to help guide you and help you understand where to focus. So for us, the experience with YL Ventures was a lot about how do you do the market research? How do you know where to focus? How do you know where the market starts to shift from and to? And they have really close connections to a huge amount of CISOs. So if you're thinking of doing something in cybersecurity space, you want to be there. You want to understand their view on things, their contacts' view on things and so on. Unfortunately for us, very early on, we realized that there was a bigger problem that we would like to solve rather than the one that we were focusing on. And it's not in cybersecurity. So there wasn't a good match at the end in terms of investing in the company. But as a process, I think they're doing a really good job.
Okay, so how did you come in contact with them?
Actually, through our mutual friends from 8200 who studied Axonius.
Okay, so yeah, it's basically the small world effect, basically the network. And so they take you in. You don't yet have a startup per se, or you're still working on an idea. They see some promise in you as an entrepreneur, and they take you on, and they basically kind of coach you and mentor you. And of course, in their ideal situation, they mentor you into a security business, but you got sort of sidetracked. You took a detour. What led you on that detour, which I assume is similar to what you're doing now, the resource optimization?
Yeah, it's pretty much what happened. And I think what took us on that detour was that we realized that cybersecurity in the civil world is very different from cybersecurity in the IDF. And the things that we imagined that mattered were not exactly what everyone was talking about. And the shift to the cloud has changed a lot of the things from what we knew to how they really worked out in the real world. But also, everyone talked to us about running at 10 to 40% utilization.
Yeah.
So for us, it's a huge opportunity. You just have to find out why and make sure that it's scalable, so you don't have to do any services work or anything like that in between companies. So you can install it everywhere, basically.
Yeah, I guess it's not much different from other see on AI and machine learning. Like normally we're used to seeing the kind of let's call it sexy uses, like self-driving cars and all these sort of things. But in the end, I always like to say that basically we're just digital plumbers. We're dealing with bits and circuits and bytes, etc. But in the end, the logic is very similar as a transportation network or anything like that. And so was that something that you discovered through working on security, like the uses of machine learning and AI, and then to apply it to resource efficiency?
So, not exactly. Once we realized what the problem was, and that there's a huge, huge opportunity in terms of how much benefit you can bring anyone, you had to realize what was the source of the benefit. In our case, source of the problem, sorry. In our case, since everything is running in the cloud and a lot of organizations are running microservice-based architectures, you'd think that you can simply scale that small part of the chain that's the weakest one. But once you dig deep into it, you realize that's not necessarily the case, and that's oversimplification of things. You have to take a lot of things into consideration, whether it's all the way across the stack, from the lowest levels of the kernel where we are, and all the way up to your load balancing, your horizontal scaling thresholds, the time it takes you to warm up your machine, and so on.
Yeah, so this was something that you came across and thought this is a problem that hasn't been solved yet. And why do you suppose it hadn't been solved yet? What was the new thing that enabled you to start Granulate now, as opposed to someone else starting it sooner?
I think there are a few things that enabled us to do that. First of all, it's the idea that you have this, for a lot of organizations, you have these microservice-based architectures. So your machine is doing the same thing over and over again, and it's aimed to do one thing. So this could be a container, or this could be a VM, but they're aimed to do one thing. So you have the ability to create a repetitive pattern that would close a loop if you have some optimization function. Now, obviously, you need that optimization function. Otherwise, you don't know if you're in the right direction or not. And you have to have the user supply that, because how else would you know if latency is the most important part, throughput, IOPS, and so on.
Mm. And so that's what you use the machine learning to figure out once you put it in and see what the patterns are looking like.
Exactly.
Okay. And, on going back to you a little bit, you now have the role of CEO. Basically, it makes you responsible for everything. Ultimately, everything from strategy to, making sure there's enough space in the office to anything and everything is your problem. What has that been like? I mean, is that what you pictured it would be before you actually took this role?
I think it's really hard to say. No one is born a CEO, thankfully. So we knew that it can be done. I will say that there's been a lot of debate very early on who should be the CEO, whether it's one of us, someone else, or not. But when we realized that we couldn't find someone who spoke to us, we said, look, it's a huge problem. We'll get the right people on board. They'll help us get through it. And luckily, I have a mentor from, I don't know, a year and a half before we actually started the company, who's been working with me on how to do that. He's been a CEO of public companies. And so for him, this was an opportunity to sort of pass the torch. And for me, it was a huge opportunity to learn from someone who's been there a few times. And he's actually right there right now, founding his own startup.
Yeah, that's great. No, it's great to be fortunate and know people like that, because it really does take a lot of that kind of luck.
I agree, but I think in at least in the Israeli ecosystem, things are very, very, as you mentioned, small world. Mm-hmm. So even if you don't know the right people yourselves, everyone is happy to introduce you to the ones that help them or anyone that you're looking for.
Yeah,
I will say that our VP of sales and VP of product came from a random meeting where I met this guy who told me, look, I have a friend. He did something in cost reduction in the past. How about you go meet him? It might be very helpful.
Yeah, no, that's it. Yeah, it's really, and then you start, and that is again, back to that role of CEO. It's like, how do you assemble these people who are, I would say, hopefully even better than you are, and get them to be on the same path, right? That's also a challenge. That as the entrepreneur, you do things yourself. And then slowly you have to kind of trust other people and get the right people on board. And that said, you're a young company. I think you were founded in April of this year. So just what are we now?
We were founded in August 2018. So around 2 years and something now. We came out with the PR in April this year. Yeah.
That's right. No, you were funded this year. So this year, I think, is like when you started really adding team members, right? Before that, was it just you and Tal?
No, we were about 12 people going into April.
Okay. And then, also, even 2018 is still a pretty young company. How do you see your progression as CEO? Some CEOs can stay at all stages of growth, or do you see a point where you're taking the company from the first stage to another stage, and then it's time to find a different leader? Or how do you see your role evolving?
That's a very interesting question, because I think the answer doesn't necessarily lie with me at any given point in time, right? Because first of all, it's my first experience, so I wouldn't really know what is required for the next stages. Mm-hmm. You try to learn as much as you can, but when it boils down, it's your company, you've been there, and you know what's best. So even if people outside would tell you this is what you should focus on, it's not necessarily the case, and you have to understand that. But at the end of the day, as a founder, you're also a major shareholder. So you want to make sure that you do what's best for the shareholders, which include you as well.
Yeah.
And if the right people come in and they can take your company 1, 2, 3 levels ahead, I think you should seriously consider it, no matter what the opportunity is, because it's not that different than if someone puts an offer on the table for an M&A, right?
Yeah.
I'm sure everyone at every point in time has a price. So with Red Hat, that was $37 billion. Other companies probably less.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And also in terms of like passing the torch to other leaders, you've seen it at Google and at other companies, you know, that the founders will run it for a while, but at some point they get in someone else to be the CEO and they continue doing what they're good at, which is being the visionaries or the, you know, whatever they are, right? Everyone's different. And, you know, with that in mind, I think every startup that, or just about every startup that I'm familiar with, and I don't mean just startups, but also large companies, which were also once startups, they never have just one leader. You know, they usually have at least two founders or two leaders, but usually it's a little bit more than that. And everybody plays some version of a different role. You know, you have the, I think there's probably three roles in a successful company. There's like the visionary, there's the detail-oriented person, the sort of quality control, and then there's usually a more of a sales type person, somebody who just knows everybody, right? And usually between two or three people, you share those roles in some way, depending on the talents, right? How do you see that with your co-founder or co-founders? What role do you play and how do you guys balance each other off to make the company successful?
I'm not sure I would be able to fit our leadership team into those categories. I'll say that a bit differently. I'll defer to what you said earlier. When you have to bring in people who are preferably better than you. So they have to be better than you at what they do. Otherwise, it doesn't matter. And I don't think that the leadership team is just built on the founders. I think that as you progress, you bring in people who are far more far more experienced than you in a lot of things, and preferably those things are the ones that you're probably weakest points. And so it makes a lot of sense that you add them to the leadership team, because there's a good reason that you brought them on. You supply, let's say in our case, the technology side, the product side, the vision. I think this is a super important part of being the CEO, is to be able to understand the vision, articulate it, and then let the rest of the people do the magic. So if I divide the role of the CEO, it's basically decide on the vision, obviously with your leadership team, but at the end of the day, make the decision, hire the right people to create that vision, and make as little decisions as possible, because that means that there's some sort of collision between the departments and they couldn't decide without you. So at the end of the day, you're sort of deferring more and more of your own role, and you're hoping, or at least you have to make sure that people make the decisions based on what you would have done to create that vision that you set out to create. And so for me, a leadership team cannot be just the founders, or in that sense. And I think every one of these should supply their own, so sort of everything of what you just said, because not me, not Tal, not Tom, our VP of product, can go to our VP of sales and say, look, your metrics are incoherent. We have to get those metrics from him, whether it's through his business operations manager or whatnot. But he has to supply those metrics, or we have to trust him that he fills out the Salesforce correctly, so we can measure everything up. And it's true across all departments. That's why we work with measurable goals. So one of the things that we really like about Granulate's product is that you can measure everything. If we impacted your performance, you can see that. And the same goes for any department. We want to make sure that we understand how it works. So every department has to have that guy that's very detailed oriented, in our case, at least.
Yeah, no, and I think that's really the key, I think, to being a great leader, CEO or otherwise, is, I mean, that difficult balance between you being ultimately responsible for everything, absolutely everything, and that happens in the company, balancing that with the fact that you need to trust other people to get that done. Yeah, and a lot of CEOs, especially at early stage companies, tend to struggle with that. Some, will go too far in one direction or the other. So, I think you guys have done a really great job balancing that out. I've met a lot of members of your team, so that's really important. And I'm also interested in Intel Ignite. You were an alumni of, or an alumnus, I should say, of Intel Ignite, the company was, and that's where you came out of what led into your most recent funding round. What was that like? And given the experience you had at Weil Ventures, and then you went to Intel Ignite, what was the experience there like? What did you get from that experience, and how did that lead to getting your funding round?
So it's really hard to say that one thing led to another, right? Because it's like a process that you start from the seed round. You have to understand what your path to an A round looks like, and when you do your A round, you have to understand what the path to the B round looks like. So I think Intel Ignite being a program that's rather like 2 to 3 months was actually at the end of the stages. It did bring us a lot of value, but I'll also say that we've been to Icon SV 101 in May of 2019, and it's not to say that it affected us less, right? The fact that it wasn't in proximity to the round doesn't mean we didn't get as much. So it's really hard to pinpoint a reason to enable the A round. I think what if we talk about Intel Ignite, I think there are two key things there. First of all, Intel is fully on board with that. So they bring in everyone from every department. And for a company that does optimization, working with Intel is huge, right? If we can provide Intel value on their own benchmarks, it's something that we can take pride of, because, well, that's what they do. And so that was very meaningful in terms of the collaboration with Intel itself. But in terms of as a company, I think there are 3 things that I would probably say are very important there. First of all is the mentors. They tailor the program to your own needs. So each company arrives at a slightly different stage. One is looking more about the product market fit. One is addressing the go-to-market levels and so on. So they don't only tailor the right mentor for you at the right stage, but they also tailor the right program. So who are you going to meet? What are you going to focus on? How are you going to set the time schedule for the CEO to see that you're actually achieving that and not just focusing on what's here right now? Second is the other founders. So this is also true for Icon SV 101. The ability to stay close to a huge amount of founders who are in similar stages or just one stage ahead or one stage back, you get to bounce a lot of ideas and perspectives as to what you might want to do. And as a founder, it's really hard to get that perspective because no one talks about the hard things of being a founder. And it might get pretty lonely, and it's really hard to find someone who's seen it the way that you've seen it, because from the outside it could look like everything's going really well. You had a press release, you won some award, but the truth is it's a lot of hard work and a lot of grind, and not always you have the answers. And it's really important to have someone to lean onto and to talk to about these things. So having those other founders to bounce off ideas and to get that perspective is a huge advantage. And lastly, I think Intel Ignite was structured really well for companies who are looking to do product market fit. So for us, this came at a sort of slightly on the late side, but it really helped us focus a concise messaging, both for us and for our customers. And I think altogether, alongside the fact that things are going quite well, that what created the right situation for another funding round.
Yeah, no, I love what you're saying about, that people kind of see the highlights, they see the award and funding rounds, and what you don't see is the tough slog behind it. I always make the comparison with like pop stars and rock stars, like famous rock bands that everybody looks at and they see the guy on stage making it look so easy and think, I could do that. And they don't talk about, the 7 years of practicing and sleeping in vans, and entrepreneurship is very similar, including dealing with members of your own band. So that's I think a really important point. That we see the glamour of it, but we don't see the work that goes behind it.
Yeah, and I think there's also a huge bias, right? Because at the end of the day, I think the statistics shows that it's 95% of startups that fail.
Yeah.
But you will never hear about that because that's not what the press is interested in.
Yeah.
So you only see the highlights, and you only see it when it's good. So the grass looks very green, but the truth is, you have to do a lot of hard choices, and you have to set aside a lot of your own personal life to do that. And so if you choose to go this path, it'll look very different than what it seems from the outside.
Yeah, and we do tend to like to reverse engineer Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs did these things, we should do them too, and forget that there's probably about 1,000 Steve Jobses that we never heard of.
At least.
Yeah, and I think I'm being kind. You're right. There's like a million ways to fail and like 3 ways to succeed, right? And by the Icon SV101 you mentioned, that was another incubator.
Yeah.
Okay, was that in Israel?
No, SV101 is a 2-week accelerator program in Silicon Valley. It's aimed for companies that are post-seed and maybe A round. They take you for a couple of weeks in Silicon Valley. All the founders, or most of the founders, sleep under the same roof in an Airbnb. So you get a lot of psychology time. And you get to meet people of a different caliber than you might be used to. They teach you how to think big, not like Israeli startup ecosystem big, where in the Israeli ecosystem you probably have a huge amount of exits every year, but a very small amount of unicorns in that ratio. And while things in Israel are around, let's say, 60, 80, 100 million exits, the same companies might start in the US and do it 2, 3, 4, 5 times more. And what Icon is trying to show you is how just thinking differently might affect the end result and might affect the way that you build your company. So I think this was the first time where we told ourselves, you're right. Like, we never thought before Icon about our 5-year plan to make this company reach $100 million in revenue. And I think that's a key difference, because when you're just a seed, raising your seed in Silicon Valley, that's the plan that the American founder comes with. They come with a plan to do 5 to 7 years to $100 million. They don't even talk to you about how they're going to reach the next milestone, because it's not interesting in the grand scheme of things. And being being there and hearing that from all these people that you hear about, from people like Ben Horowitz and Peter Thiel, it's like, okay, I get it. This is why it's so much bigger here, because people think a lot bigger. And I'm not saying that, an $80 million exit or a $300 million exit is not a good outcome. It could be a good outcome for a lot of people.
I'll take it.
Exactly, right?
Yeah.
But you'll never get to that 1.5, 2.5 billion if you don't understand that this is the way that you should be thinking. So I think it also helps you understand the scale that the American founder thinks in versus what the Israeli one.
That's a real long game, absolutely. And it sounds like you got really great exposure, global and Silicon Valley in this case exposure. A lot of contact with people outside of Israel. What have you found to be the biggest difference? It could be a challenge, either a challenging difference or an opportunity difference doing business with Israeli customers versus going out globally and doing business internationally? What's like the biggest thing you've had to shift in that transition?
I think there are quite a few things, by the way. The first of all is that the Israeli market has matured quite a bit. So if you go back 5 to 10 years, it would have been really easy to say, oh, you have Israeli customers, they're probably your friends installing you or whatever. If we go back to the statement about the Israeli ecosystem, it's very small and everyone knows everyone, right? So you get introduced to a lot of people, and a lot of people try to help because they understand how hard it is, and they understand that people help them, so they're happy to help. And so they do give you the opportunity, but you have to prove yourself, because these are companies of the largest scale. So if you look at what we have here in Israel, you've got things like Snake, AppsFlyer, Iron Source, Intel. If we look at Mobileye alone, besides Intel, that's another $15 billion company, right? So you have this huge amount of companies who are valued way over $1 billion. And saying these are your customers is not a bad thing anymore. It's very meaningful. You know, we have Wix in Israel. Waze came out of here, and their R&D is still in Israel. So if you sell to these companies, you know that you can sell to the digital native companies of the world, because the best of the best are also here. Mm-hmm. And so having Israelis as design partners, it doesn't mean I have my friends installing me somewhere anymore. Yeah. And this is a super important part about your maturity of the product maturity when you go to the States. Because when you come to the States, you have probably one shot with each customer that you talk to. You have one shot to impress them. You have one shot to get them to install you and try you out. So you want to make sure that your product is ready. But the lessons that you've been given and the amount of times that you were allowed to fail in Israel really get you ready to do that in the States. And I think we owe a huge amount to the Israeli ecosystem in that sense.
Yeah, it's I've come in contact with it on and off over the years, and I've seen that as well. You know, it's really grown and it's big, and you hear more and more companies just in IT in general. You see a brand name, you know, some logo of a new company, and then you find out later it's an Israeli company, you know, and you didn't know that. Yeah, there's many times that's happened in the last 5 years for me, you know, so that's really great. And my experience also working in like early stage, especially early stage companies, not only early stage companies, to be fair, even established ones, but usually when you have a sort of a new product or a new approach, is that your biggest competition is actually simply doing nothing. You know, people will love your product. They say, this is great. And then it's not that they bought a different product. They just didn't do the thing. Have you found that to be a challenge, or does that happen for you? I mean, you have a very clear value prop. Do you run across this as well?
I think that's the luck, right? Because everything's very tangible in what we do. So you either help or you don't. You either provide a benefit or you don't. People won't buy that just to say that, you know, I bought it. They have to see the value for themselves. And also, since each case is different, it's a classic try and buy. You have to try on your own system. Mm-hmm. So we didn't encounter such a case where people installed Granulate and didn't use it. And if they did, they wouldn't pay for it, because we don't charge if you don't use it. So I think in that sense, we've been pretty fortunate. It does come with other drawbacks, right? Because if you actually do something active, then not everyone would be open to that. Not everyone would say, yeah, I'm happy to have someone or something making the decisions for me, or I'm happy to install an agent that makes changes in the kernel. So there's a balance. Like if you go more towards the tangible, measurable, active agent, it comes with its own drawbacks. the other side, you could say, look, all I need is read-only access to whatever, and I'll provide you with some benefit or another.
Yeah, so I guess it's really about building trust. I can see some parallels, if I put it in real simple terms, to using your credit card on the internet, which is kind of an active thing and is vulnerable, right? And 20 years ago, it was unthinkable. And now we do it almost without, even giving it a second thought. In fact, we even prefer to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think probably with what you're doing, and we'll talk a little bit about exactly what it's doing, but indeed, it brings a lot of value, and it's measurable and it's quick. But there is that little thing about, but you're going to do something with the kernel, right? It's sort of active. So it sounds like really it's about building trust. All right, start small, give it a try, see that it works, see that everything's okay, and then scale it from there. Is that usually a good approach?
Yeah, and it always should be, not just with Granulate. I think that if you have the ability to minimize risk and see the gain at a small steps, that's not a bad thing. I think, as you mentioned, when you build trust, you have to do it step by step. First step could be 1 to 2 machines, and you don't even activate Granulate. You just see that it doesn't harm your performance or it doesn't kill your machine for whatever reason. And then you can activate one of these, do a side-by-side comparison, or install on a little more, and so on. Yeah. So there's no rush, since every agent, at least in our case, is self-contained. You can start with a single VM. Doesn't matter if it's 1, 10, or 1,000. And I really relate to what you mentioned about things like PayPal that 20 years ago, I don't know if people entered their real names when they signed up for it.
Yeah.
And there's been a huge shift, right? If we look before Facebook, people would be very cautious to put their own personal data out there.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden Facebook came, and you're happy to share every detail of your life.
We don't even read the T&C. It's like, sure, right, I agree, accept.
Yeah.
Absolutely. No, that's really great. And so you're basically what Granulate is doing is it's using machine learning AI techniques to analyze what you're currently doing with a particular application or workload. As you mentioned, it's usually probably something that's repetitive, that's structured in some form. It's not just random, user input. And how does it actually work then? How does it use the machine learning to learn these things and then put it in action and put it to use?
So the thing is, your application, you probably don't change the code every few seconds, right? You could do that once a day or a couple of times a day, but that's pretty much the extent of it when you talk about each microservice. So there's a huge amount of time where your code does the same thing over and over again, different data, so different user data, different application data, whatnot, but it utilizes the resources in the same paths. So we can think of the easiest example was probably a login request. When you log into Netflix, for example, I don't know if you have Netflix, but when you log in, they start to do anywhere between 250 to 300 requests on their backend just to provide you with a successful login, because they want to give you a continue watching your list, what's trending, what's new. They customize the thumbnails for each series and movie according to your own history. So you have a huge amount of things that you have to do, and each microservice usually does one of these. But no matter if you signed up yesterday and you don't have a history, or you signed up 7 years ago and you have a huge history, the process is going to look very similar. You're going to come in, we're going to verify that you logged in, we're going to query multiple microservices, and at some point, they're all going to return a response, and we can return a response back to you, and so on.
And I guess one key of what you're saying there is that 200 to 300 processes that kick off. If you can shave off, just a little bit times 2 and 300, that's a big difference.
Yeah, I think times 2 or 300 per each request, and each server is handling tens of thousands of requests at the same second.
Wow.
So you have a huge amount of opportunities to misprioritize. And that's what happens when you have something that's generic, right? It was aimed to be very, very interactive. Like, we are now video conferencing, and you could take notes, you could write documents, you could browse the web all at the same time, and everything would run very smoothly. But when you think about your application server, it's doing the same routine over and over again. So you might have been able to create something that was a little more tailored to that, that would make the right decisions at any given point, whether you should do process that data, process this data, accept new requests, and so on.
Yeah. And so who in a company is your primary customer? Like, who's the person who would seek out a solution like this?
So that depends on the vertical, actually. You've got verticals who are very latency sensitive or throughput sensitive, where they care about the performance because it impacts their business. We can think of a few examples. So e-commerce, gaming, payment solution, fraud, algo traders, ad tech companies, and then on the streaming side, everything that's over the top media. If you're broadcasting right here, right now, then you probably care about the concurrent usage. Big data analytics, when you waiting days or hours to a job to finish, and you might want to shorten that as much as possible. So it depends on the vertical itself, whether it's going to be more R&D oriented or the data science oriented, versus companies who are looking to save on costs, which are usually under the CIO, VP of IT, and so on.
Yeah. Okay. So that makes sense. So on the one hand, it's basically anyone who can attach a monetary amount to latency. Basically reduced latency equals X number of increased revenue. And then the other is overall general efficiency, right? Like the CIO just trying to cut costs overall across the board.
Increase margins. It's usually a good thing to do.
Yeah, that's not usually a difficult case to make. That's true. Yeah. As long as you can earn their trust that you're going to do it, right? And that's where it is. So, I mean, I guess probably we answered my next question. We've probably kind of answered, but just to close things off a little bit, what should a person in that position be asking themselves, or what should they be assessing to see if there's room for improvement in these areas?
I think in Granulate's case, it's pretty easy to say that for most organizations that would be relevant. We simply add an optimization layer that doesn't exist right now in the kernel, and but in general, I think as an organization matures, they have some sort of different solutions that they could use. So let's take migration to the cloud use case, for example. When you first migrate, if you've done a lift and shift movement, then you know that you're over provisioned. You know that you haven't utilized anything that the cloud has to offer, whether it's spot instances, reserved instances. You know that you probably haven't done right sizing because you use the same machine types that you use in on-prem. So the general notion is that when you finish a migration, you end up paying about 4 times more than your TCO on the data center. So you have a huge amount of opportunities to save. And if you haven't utilized any of those, then I think that's the first thing that you should do, because it's as easy as that. You can start scaling in and out. You can start with just cutting down your machine, and you can start using the spot instances for those stateless applications. Mm-hmm. Once you're done with that, which is sort of the best practices within the cloud, you can start thinking about how you're going to take these new solutions that would help you cut down even further. So you have a lot of solutions that monitor whether it's a dev environment or test environment, and they help you shut it down and turn it back up. You've got solutions like Granulate that would help you reduce the amount of overall compute that you use. You have solutions that would do a vertical scaling and horizontal scaling in real time, all the time. So that's when you start to look into those solutions, and that depends on the amount of manpower that you were willing to put into it, because Solutions like Granulate are more on the autonomous side, and solutions and there are other solutions out there that are more aimed at monitoring and insight, which are more manually operated. So that depends on the organization.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're talking about data centers, then usually Granulate fits in really well, because then you can start decreasing the size of your machine, and you can start increasing the density, or simply enjoying better timing, right? So if you're a data scientist and you're waiting 6 hours for a job to complete, and all of a sudden you can cut that down to 2, that means you could do a lot more on the same day.
Yeah. It's really about quality and go to market, right? For any customer of yours, including your company, for any company, you want a high quality product as quickly as possible. And I think what's great, because I've worked basically in the infrastructure side of IT from my whole career, which is the part that they say that it's like the people who make the trains operate on time. They only know you exist when they're late, when the trains are not on time, right? But the beauty of it is that when you put effort into an infrastructure, the rest works smoothly. And given all of the new workloads and technologies that are emerging right now, and the change in things like Kubernetes and cloud native, this is like the perfect moment, I think, for a company like yours. Probably, kind of going to my earlier question, why now? And I think a lot of people are really reconsidering their whole infrastructure. And so this is a really great timing for a product like this.
Yeah, and I agree. And I think a lot of companies are also looking for things that are easy to implement, do not require code changes, and it's really hard to say, like, if you would have given me a button and said press here and you'll save 30%, 40% on your compute costs, a lot of people would press it, right? It just makes sense in some way.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Well, that's great. No, I think so. I really appreciate it. This has been a good, for me, especially a kind of an introduction and an overview. I'm very sure we will follow this up with more talks, getting maybe deeper into the product with some of the guys from your product team. It's a great story, the story of you and the company. And so I'm really looking forward to seeing what comes next from you guys. So thanks very much for your time.
And thank you for having me.